Welcome back, Wargamers, to a very deep dive into the Mortal Realms, and this time, I mean that literally, because we're going underground into an incredibly important location known as Varanthax's Maw. Now, if that sounds familiar to you, it's because it's come up quite a bit recently, featuring as the main location of conflict in Broken Realms Morathi Act 1, and as the thematic setting of the latest expansion to Warcry Catacombs. It's all kind of set in that little thing. Oh, it can represent other locations, of course, but specifically in the story that comes with the box, it's representing Varanthax's Maw. And when I did my coverage of Broken Realms Morathi, I did touch on some of the general bits of info about the Maw, as I'm going to say, just to shorten it up a bit. But I wanted to take some more time and do a much deeper dive, because this is one of those very pivotal locations that brings a lot of life to the realms, and honestly to the 8 points in specific, because we don't know a ton about that region. And so very plainly, let's ask the question, what is Varanthax's Maw? Simply put, it is a mind-bendingly massive underground network of tunnels, fissures, mines, and it gets its name from the colossal dragon skeleton that marks its entrance up on the surface. This Drake, or was, Varanthax himself. And to approach his mouth, the Maw, is to find access to the unyielding horror of the caverns down below. As for Varanthax himself, the actual dragon, there's not a whole lot of information about how the skeleton ended up there. Some assume it was Archaon himself, Grand Marshal of the Apocalypse, that slew the beast and left his carcass where it is, as a trophy/landmark to demonstrate his power, while others believe it was a race of Chaos Duarden that tried to subdue the great beast and somehow ended up killing it by accident. Whatever the case, the massive skeleton marks the spot of one of the most important places in the realms, at least for recent events. And so the question is, what makes this place important? Varanite. Okay, each realm has its own unique realm stone representing the nature of that place given physical form. If you find realmstone in Ghiran, it's going to really represent the powers of life and rebirth and renewal and all those kinds of things. Realmstone is an incredibly powerful substance, but what makes Varanite unique is its ability to warp and corrupt or transmute anything it touches with the power of chaos, because they have so saturated the 8 points with hate and malice that the Realmstone itself reflects that. So if you were to dip your hand in it, for example, you might pull your hand away to find it's now like a giant crab claw, a tentacle. It might just erode to dust, or it spawns a dozen eyes that watch your every move. It's weird and highly volatile stuff. And in its natural state, it appears as this thick, boiling liquid, described as looking like gore or blood. And it's extremely difficult to locate because, while most realms have their realmstone deposits towards the edges of the realms, like if you go outward towards the disc ends, Varanite runs deep underground, like in veins. I mean, when we talk about mining, vein is how you describe like a big patch of a resource, but I'm talking like literal blood veins that run through the 8 points, because to harvest Varanite is to bleed the world around you itself, right? Cue the death music. It's the coolest thing. Nothing else could quite represent a chaos, themed realmstone the same way. And while its natural state is kind of this thick, viscous liquid, in the hands of a master craftsman, it can be forged into a solid state, able to make incredible weapons and arcane items and more. And so, in the context of the Maw, it's been discovered that there are many, many rich and stable veins and pools of Varanite snaking through this place, making it a highly sought-after prize for just about anyone. However, getting to this prize is not as easy as, throwing on a hard hat, grabbing a pick, and just walking into a mine all casually, right? No one saunters into Varanthax's Maw. It's a hellish place. It's filled with endless corridors that overlap. They can change as you turn around. Sometimes they just dead end at the lairs of ancient beasts. There are levels that are alive, almost like you're walking through like the esophagus of a giant monster. The walls are like moist with like saliva and that kind of stuff, and it just wants to gobble you up. Eyes will grow from the sides, and hands from the ground might reach up and grab you. Some corners are filled with sharp, jagged crystals that can cut you with no pressure applied. They're just that sharp. Throughout the endless web, many enemies have made their home. Hulking creatures, dark sorcerer covens, hellish forge masters, slavers, roving bands of murderers. A warlord, for example, that is given may enter with an army. He'll take control of a few levels of this place, and then the next month be swallowed up by the Maw's other denizens, because it's just relentless. You can't really secure anything or get a real foothold anywhere. And the closest thing to order in this place is the will of Archaon. Right? Seeing the potential of Varanite and its power source, knowing its rarity, he wanted every drop for himself. And so Archaon has erected a series of fortress foundries, is kind of the way that I'll explain them, throughout the tunnel network, constantly taking in Varanite, crafting it, keeping it secure until the Everchosen has need of it. And it was really one of these locations that featured prominently during the Broken Realms Morathi, as Morathi was going in to presumably get rid of the Varanite. They come up against one of these little mini fortress foundries. And the battle there is incredibly brutal because Archaon doesn't joke around. It takes real power and military might to have a firm location in a place like Varanthax's Maw. So each one of these things has towering walls, traps, defenses, and a legitimate army inside of it. The main lord in charge of Archaon's network of, underground strongholds is a chaos lord named Lord Rokar Gresh, leader of the Crimson Brethren and guardian of Varanthax's Maw. He's sort of like the middle management. Archaon put him in charge. You need to keep this mining operation going and also, kind of secure my foothold, have the slightest bit of order, structure, and power and command here. And while this character does not feature a ton in Broken Realms Morathi, we definitely get the sense that he is a faithful servant of both Archaon himself and Chaos Undivided. Because when Sigmar and Morathi come near it, the hornet's nest gets rattled and he brings hell itself out to meet them. If you remember some of those bits of that story, he had massive armies that wiped out Stormcast to a tooth. He has experimental spells going off, all kinds of war shrines. It's a whole mess. Now, as I said, this is also the narrative setting for Warcry Catacombs, and for that, I think it is the perfect location, okay? Massive armies struggle here because you have tight corridors. The more mouths that you have to feed, meaning the bigger your force, well, the more supply lines become really important, and so feeding an entire army is just as hard as getting that army to conquer anything. So small war bands, described as groups of roving murderers in the book like I mentioned before, can actually succeed. They can travel light, they can be discreet, not attract a ton of attention, and just kind of take their time wading through this place. And one of the things I love about it, it feels like a very fleshed out location, right? It got its own history, source of significance, notable little locations within it. If you see the map, there's a whole bunch of little tiny corridors and just kind of dead ends, that kind of thing. It has everything that you would ever want because it spreads so far amongst the 8 points. It reaches under lakes and forests and castles and more. So that means underground, it has, grottos, caverns, fissures, underground cities, temples, and more scattered throughout it. I love it. And for a skirmish game, I truly do think it's perfect. And honestly, the rules that accompany it, both in Broken Realms Morathi and Catacomb rules, in addition, they're bolted onto Warcry, both of them are phenomenal. Really they are, in terms of representing this place where things are nuts and there's crazy weapons laying around and all kinds of terrible places you can end up throughout the cavern. Now, as I do with all these videos, I kind of want to end it by talking about why is this cool, okay? And then there's a few things. One is that I really do believe the 8 points needs more places with better defined lore, okay? Because really, aside from this, we only really know of 2 other places. That's Karngrad, a city in the same kind of region as this, which we'll talk about later in the week, and the Varanspire, which is Archaon's, fortress castle thing in the dead center of the realm. But honestly, we don't have a really good picture of what his home base is like outside of that. We know some of the all gates have been closed. That's about it. One of the things I really like about adding Varanite and using that as a way to make a location within the 8 point significant is that it makes getting here important, right? Before, it was only important because Archaon had the 8 points. Like, we've actually seen the name Varanthax's Maw in the Warcry book long before we had any context that there was a giant skeleton and it's underground catacombs. We saw the name before it was ever fleshed out. But now, there's a prize, right? There's a MacGuffin. Their stakes have been added onto why people would want to go there, why we need to stop people from going there or coming out of there, all that kind of stuff. Once you add stakes to a scenario, it really just increases the amount of interest. Last thing I'd say is that it can be whatever you want. And honestly, that's a strength of a lot of these AOS locations, right? It's perfect for dungeon explorers, Warcry warbands, that kind of stuff. Honestly, I desperately want the guys over at Soulbound or Cubicle 7 who produces Soulbound, the AOS RPG. I want them so desperately to take a crack at this because I think it would just be amazing. I want them to do this in Karngrad and I'll be the happiest man in the world. So anyway, friends, thank you all so much for watching this video, and thank you so much for the incredible, humbling response for Broken Realms Morathi. It's meant the absolute world to me. If you have anything that you'd like covered as a lore video, go ahead and leave in the comments down below, and I will use that as inspiration for future content. Thank you all so much for watching and listening. Happy wargaming. Hey everybody, I hope you enjoyed that video. It was made possible by the folks over here to the left. These are my top supporters over here on YouTube and on Patreon that keep this channel going. If you'd like to learn more about how to become a supporter and get some cool things in the process, like exclusive pictures and interactions with me and get your questions answered here on the channel, go ahead and click any of the links down below or the join button on the community page over on YouTube. Regardless of your choice, I wanted to thank you so much for joining me with this video, and I look forward to seeing you in my next one. Happy wargaming.